This event has been a long time in planning, and I've been asked to kick it off by doing what's impossible, but impossible is only a word. I'm going to spend 5 minutes-ish to describe two great people and two great careers. First off, I want to say thank you for coming, and welcome back to the building. I know some of you left, scratch marks out in the front doorways coming back from spring break. This building is a lifeless husk without you. You're the lifeblood of this building. And we're glad that you took the time to come and share this time. And we hope that you leave enlightened and inspired at some level. That's our goal today, straight up forward. I have a couple of thank yous. I want to thank Sharon Charney here, the Charney Lecture, named after her incredible husband. And she's been a great benefactor and friend of the school. I want to thank Roger. Show him your leg, Roger. This is a man who said, I've hurt myself. Mission focused, and we're going to. We appreciate that sacrifice. We appreciate that sense of duty. We were going to show the trailer for the new movie or the new documentary. We decided not to for the sake of the internet simulcast, but I'll commend it to you. And it hit me just last night. I want to apologize to Sharon. From now on, when we do these, I will have a flyer in the door that summarizes Professor Charney's career. He was a great, great man. In fact, I wanted to read to you the closing comments from the American Journal of International Law Board of Editors, who said the following. The Board of Editors of the American Journal grieves not only for the loss of our colleague and friend, but also for the loss to the study and the advance of international law. And this is the part I love, because it describes both of these men, a splendid scholar and a great and good man. That's it. That's John Charney. And anybody who knew him, I vividly remember, I was in the State Department in 2002. When he passed away, I went home, and true story, I don't think I've ever told this to Sharon. I said to my wife, oh my gosh, what a loss for Vanderbilt, what a loss for our community. They're going to have to hire maybe 3 people to do part of what he did. And here we are so many years later, had no idea I'd be one of those. So I'm the half. Let me give you a scene setter. Ambassador Carstens, you're going to meet in a minute, is responsible, as we talked about in the press stuff, for people you've heard of, Evan Gershkovich, Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, but he's one of the few, these guys as well. I want to introduce our guests from the State Department. If you're interested in service in the State Department, they'll be around, and they've already promised they will answer questions. But they work in the SPEHA office that this ambassador used to run. So they're the team, the support team behind those ongoing all around the world. They would know the names I'm about to give to you, but very few other people do. Brittany Griner gets released, and she gets a New York Times magazine story. But there are so many others. During the Biden administration, this team got 58 Americans out of custody. Yeah. People who got to go home to their families. And we're delighted today to have one of those in our midst, Matthew Heath, Marine, not no such thing as a former Marine, a Marine from Knoxville, drove in today to spend time with you. We're going to give him time in a little bit, and he brought his lawyers, not on the evasive counsel, of course, but they want to share with you some of the professional opportunities in this field. It is ripe with opportunity if you have the intellect and the audacity to take it on. But here are the names that they would know that other Americans don't. George Blesman, Ryan Corbett, Austin Tice. We're talking about Austin now, held in Syria. Mahmoud Habibi. There's a diplomatic history on my bookshelf called The Last 3 Feet. And the point is very straightforward. We're going to spend years and years and years. The deal isn't done until it's done. And it takes, for those who've taken the practice lab, those core tenets of absolute integrity, absolutely tireless, indefatigable pursuit of truth, but an awareness that everything is always iterative. So if you just heard what I said, you don't need to take the practice lab. You just learned what you need to know. Everything is always changing, and it's that frontline team that's responding to changes, the political changes, the economic changes, the personality changes. It's endless, as he will tell you. The deal isn't done until you put somebody on the ground that has the tenacity to get that deal done and get that American home. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the mechanics of that and the law and the way you actually do that. A word about John Charney, 2 words, maybe more than two. As I said, he was a great colleague and a great professor. In many ways, we have lived into his model. He was the co-editor of the American Journal of International Law, as is Professor Brunk. He was deeply involved in diplomatic negotiations around the world, as are others of our faculty. He was a great colleague to peers. He really was. He was incredibly productive in his field. He had an incredibly supported family who tended him during that long last illness. And everybody who commented on him says he loved his family. So my point to you young students is you can do it all. You really can if you have the technical skill and the ability to rise above the inherent friction of our business. In fact, if you go into the Bartholomew room, and I urge you to do this, there's a black and white picture of Professor Charney just by the door of Bartholomew. It's the only black and white photo in there. I go back to the Sesame Street thing. One of these things is not like the other. You look in that picture, and you'll see kindness. You'll see a faculty member that you would go to, which many, many, many people did. You'll see the kind of colleague, as he was, as is Ambassador Carstens, that other people seek out for help and for mentorship and for advice and for just a listening set of ears. That's why this is the perfect person to come and lecture in this name. I want to give you a few quotes, and then I'll say a couple of things about him. And for you young law students, the legal phrase res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself. I won't spend a ton of time introducing the man. You'll figure it out in about 10 seconds, okay? But here are quotes that came from peers of Professor Charney, and I could just as easily say, I'll say this for your obituary. Here's what they say. His intellectual honesty and his lack of pretense. Not for Jonathan, the fashion or academic jargon of the moment. That's why we're not wearing ties, because we're here to do some business. His high standards and intellectual vigor were never failing. His work ethic and conscientiousness, I won't ask the SPEHA boys to comment on that because they got lots of stories about the 22-hour days when needed. If Jonathan said he would do it, it was done and done well. His deep commitment to the enterprise of international law, of trying through practical, you hear me a while ago say iterative, of practical and imaginative structuring and deployment to achieve a more decent, peaceful, and just world. Yes, that's what this is about. And then the last one I'll leave you is courage, is personal integrity, decency, and loyalty. That describes my friend Roger Carstens. He's a West Point graduate. Don't hold that against him. He's a West Point graduate, 7th Special Forces Group, great American. We probably connected. We've lost count of how many times we connected through the years. But iron sharpens iron, I'll tell you that. He served in the State Department Office of Human Rights, DRL, migrated from there and completed a very successful term in both administrations as the Presidential Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and is one of the people that I know who I would use to help strategize both international diplomacy and international treaty making, personalities, but more importantly, the hard-fought battles inside Washington. It's always said, if you can win the interagency, allies and enemies out there are pretty easy. You got to win Washington. And this is a man who knows how to win Washington. There's an incredible amount of wisdom here. Please join me in welcoming Roger Carstens.
An overly kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Newton. Sharon, what an honor to be given this lecture in your husband's name. I hope I do it honor and justice. We'll give it a shot. I told you I'd try for a B minus. I think Mike's inspired me to shoot for a B or B plus. So let's see what we can do today. But what an honor. I want to say thank you to a few people. Sharon, number one, thank you for this honor to give this lecture today. I'd like to thank Vanderbilt University for supporting. I'd like to thank, of course, Professor Mike Newton. I'd like to thank a few others, if I may. Lisa, where are you hiding? There she is. She's the one that made sure that we had the logistics set up for this. Nate Luce, where are you? Oh, okay. We'll give Nate Luce there. So again, who made this thing happen. I also like to recognize, and we already talked about, Matthew Heath, who spent a long time in pretty much the toughest prison that you can spend. As you rate the prisons, surprisingly, some of the places you think are going to be the worst are actually not as bad. In some of these evil prisons overseas, they might still give you a cell phone to call your parents. Matthew went to the one where there were beatings and torture and all sorts of tough things. And being a tough Marine, I think Matthew was famed for putting numerous amount of his tormentors in the hospital through bar fights and such. And I can probably better for you to tell the stories rather than me. But he approached detention in a different way than most, and it seemed to work for him. So, a great American. J.D. Stevens, a friend of mine in the very back, Navy SEAL, served in some really high speed units. And I invited J.D. here because he was played an instrumental role in bringing back from hostage Michael Moore from Somalia, and also testifying in the trial of those who took Michael Scott Moore's prisoner. So if you get a chance afterwards, surround him and ask him some good questions. Patrick Elliott and Noah Brown from the State Department. I know I had a chance to mention you, or Michael had a chance to mention you. Patrick works in DRL as part of the prevention and deterrence team, and Noah does a lot of the great work for the State Department in what's called L. It's where the lawyers go, and you might want to pincushion him too after this to ask him about how you can get a law degree and then go work for the State Department, do good work on behalf of your country. And lastly, my wife Melissa, standing right there, sitting right there. Grateful that she's able to attend this tonight. She's really the reason that I've been able to survive 5 years in the State Department in a brutal but important job. So thank you, sweetie, for. So I'm going to jump right into it. So um, just about maybe 10 minutes ago, Mike Newton was very, kind, gracious. We're trying to plot and scheme how we want this to play in the first few minutes. And he said, whatever you do, don't talk about me. And I said, okay, I got it. Seriously, don't talk about me. I said, I got it. So of course, I'm going to talk about Mike Newton. Now, Nietzsche is famous for saying that you can get the character of a man in 3 anecdotes. And it's going to be kind of there. I'm going to use both Mike and some anecdotes to get us to where I would like to take us. And purely said, I want to tell you about the journey that got us into the prevention and deterrence space. I'm going to talk about where we are, and then I'm going to try to end it with where I think we need to go. And I think there were 15 minutes left for questions, but I think that's actually where we're going to try to flourish and try to gain some back and forth interactions. So I'll try to save a few minutes, maybe get it up to 20 minutes and speed through this if I may. And I'm going to try not to look at these note cards too much. I actually try not to ever give a printed out speech because I've given those when someone does a speech for you, you read it out. And I was almost charged with crimes against humanity for having put to sleep an enormous amount of people. So I'm just going to try to read these note cards and try to interact. You should be thankful that I have this meat brace on my legs. Otherwise, I'd be wandering all about. And thankfully for the cameraman, I'm going to be stuck right here trying to go over these notes. So my first time in bumping into, we were trying to figure out, where did you meet? Where did we meet each other? I could have swore it was Panama. He's not so sure. But in 1989, on December 19th or 20th, I forget, parachuted to Panama with the 1st Ranger Battalion as part of the combat parachute assault to see Monterrey's airfield invasion of Panama. After 24 hours, of doing this, that, and the other, I had to find a place to camp my platoon out, and I chose this big warehouse on the Tokyo Monterrey's airfield that was owned by KLM. Now, in this warehouse, there were 4 pallets of beer. A pallet is a 10 by 10 foot thing that allows something to go onto a plane. It's stackable and movable. And there were all these cases of Heineken beer, and they went up to about 10 feet. So picture a 10 by 10 by 10 pallet of Heineken beer, 4 of those, a bazillion beers. And by the time I saw the lawyer, it was Mike, he claims it might not have been, not one beer had been taken. Now picture a bunch of Ranger Battalion guys, in Panama, 1989, and hungry, sweating. It's just brutal. I think it was like a bazillion degrees and humid during the day. Not one beer was touched. And I remember they took a photo of me standing by the pallet, with a stupid grin on my face. I remember I saw the photo later. And the point was, the lawyers down there were impressed that no one stole the beer there. I will say the other reason that the lawyers came down there was because we were just trying to do things the right way to get things done. And you'd never know it, but I actually used to be really good at hot wiring cars. You can't do it nowadays, but back in the olden days, you could really just do it like the movies. Jimmy the window open and get underneath and make the thing go, or put a screwdriver in there, and where they put the key. And the reason is we needed cars to support what we're doing on Panama. So I went over to the Avis car company and hotwired about 100 vehicles and then brought them over to a certain place, eventually found the keys, and then I would sign them out during the day to people, and they'd drive them around. And then the JSOC eventually came down and wanted to know if we were doing any evil, and determined that we weren't, that we could simply write a big check to Avis and that all would be good. But that's when I first encountered Mike Newton and his team. Now, a few years later, I leave the infantry and I'm going through the Special Forces qualification course. And it was a long day. We'd not slept in a long time. They were giving us a story on legal matters. We had the JSOC lawyer come over. And amazingly, this guy right here was able to keep everyone awake. But it is because he's a funny guy. He's like trying to make law interesting, and he does it. And at one point, he says, I want to talk to you about discipline under trying conditions. And he pops a photo up, and it's a picture, that picture of me standing by these 4 pallets of Heineken beer. He had no clue I was in the audience. And he goes, bunch of Rangers, not one beer was taken after combat operations in Panama. And after that, I went up and begged him for the picture, and we kind of solidified ourselves there. Later on, I would either bump into him or catch these whiffs, these traces of Mike Newton as I went through Kosovo, Albania. In Albania, we had Special Forces team on the trying to call in airstrikes on Serbian armored formations. And no matter where I was, there'd be like either Mike Newton was there or he'd be floating around, and you get emails talking about legal he was doing. And a lot of times he wasn't worried about what Major or Captain or Lieutenant Carstens was doing. A lot of times when he was in places like Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Afghanistan, and Iraq, he was working on major legal documents and major legal things that actually shaped the conduct of the wars, the peaces, and how we interact as human beings in this brutal environment. Because war, it's fascinating. To me, it's like, I would say, love, economics, the things that you can't control because there are too many variables. War is the realm of man and gods, of the rational and the irrational. It's where every moment is in being and becoming at the same time. It's a place where the physical and metaphysical meet. And you need someone like Mike who understands the law, understands the rules that we want to use to govern human activity in what can be a very violent endeavor, but at the same time be practical about how to get stuff done. And that's what I loved about Michael Newton, and that's what I loved hearing about your husband. You have to master the rules. You have to want the rules to be propagated, but you also have to live in a world where the people that Mike and I dealt with killed their way to the top, stole elections, and at times did not adhere to the things that they teach in this law school or at Harvard Law School or the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. You're dealing with people that come from different worlds, and yet you have to try to get them to start adhering to these legal norms. And that's a big part about what I want to talk about today. So the last, I know you're going to kill me. I can see you frowning. We're going to have a difficult dinner tonight because you're going to lecture me because I violated the thing. I'm not talking about you. So what I want to say is the last story that I'll tell you is we're at Chautauqua, this gathering in upstate New York that takes place every year. And I was invited by David Crane, also a former JSOC lawyer, and the only American to be in charge of a war crimes tribunal since the Nuremberg trials. Professor Crane was in charge of the Sierra Leone gatherings and also helped prosecute Charles Taylor. But he hosts this gathering in Chautauqua every year. And Mike and I were leaving Chautauqua together. He said, hey, let's catch a ride together and drive in the same car. I said, that sounds good. And he said, what do you do? And I thought, I could use some advice. Secretary Blinken, on about his first few days in the office, he takes me to this big gathering. It's a principals meeting. So it's the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of Treasury, all hosted by the National Security Advisor. And at the very end, it was a brutal, ugly discussion. And at the very end, we stepped away from all the video screens and we're walking away. And I said, Secretary Blinken puts his arm on me and he goes, we have got to find a way where we prevent Americans from getting into these problems and deter this so that in the next 10 to 15 years, this problem of hostage diplomacy goes away. Now, I know it will take 10 to 50 years, and I won't be the Secretary of State. It'll be 4 or 5 Secretaries of State from now. But if we don't do this, it's impossible to make an argument in a principals committee about doing something like swapping a person for a person if the people on the receiving end don't believe this is one day going to end. You don't want to have to do prisoner swaps for the next 100 years. The goal is maybe do them for the next 10, because we're building up a prevention and deterrence effort that will one day raise the cost of a country taking an American citizen and using them as a bargain chip to raise that cost to where the Russias of the world, the Iranians of the world, those countries that do that will say, you know what? They've figured this out. We've been doing this since 4,500 years. Read the Bible, read Herodotus, Thucydides, the Iliad, taking hostages. It's what countries and nation states and tribes have done. But if we can simply get a coalition of countries together and figure out how we can work together, and to do so not only at the State Department, which loves to throw out the sanctions tool in conjunction with the Department of Treasury, spread some sort of power across all elements of national power: diplomacy, information, intelligence, military, economic, financial, legal, all the things that a government can do. Build a toolkit that can be thrown against I'll say, the bad guys, our opponents, in a way that one day makes Russia say, well, we were going to take an American citizen, but they've figured it out. The international community has come together and they've made this too costly. Why don't we do what other countries do and just go sit down at a negotiating table and have a rational discussion with the United States of America, or the Belgians, or the Botswanans, or let's get countries together to do this. So Secretary Blinken charges me with this. The President of the United States, on July of 2022, issues an executive order which also demands that we start working on prevention and deterrence. So I'm sitting in the car, and I said, one thing Secretary Blinken said is we have to build the norms. We have to build the legal norms to stop this. And I told Blinken, I said, but everyone knows you're not supposed to take hostages. That's a no-brainer. And he goes, perhaps true. And then he gave me history on the chemical weapons conventions that took place in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that eventually built up law and norms that today actually carry some weight when people consider using chemical weapons. And Secretary Blinken charged me with doing that, and I'm laying this all on his shoulders in probably about the same amount of time. I talked fast. I threw it out there. And then off the top of his head for the next hour and a half, as we drive to the airport, he lays out exactly what he thinks we should do, to include examining what's currently out there and determining whether we can use existing tools, existing laws in international law, or whether we have to create new laws to address this problem. What can we use that's out there with the weight of law that can one day help stop this problem? Now, as he's talking, I think you've been there. Sometimes you can talk to someone and it's just a great chat. Other times you know that right at the beginning, your gut's telling you need to pull out a pen and start writing down things. So in the first 2 minutes, I figured out we're having that kind of conversation. So I pull out a pen and I'm starting to write down every word he says. And of course, I was driving at the time, so I'm sitting there like, I'm kidding. I wasn't driving. I was in the back of the car scribbling away while someone else drove. But what he eventually put off the top of his head, we went back and discussed with the Canadians. And because that by the time that I was talking with Mike Newton, my office, the SPEHA team, had built up a prevention and deterrence team. So I had 2, at times 3 people, Patrick was one of them, that did nothing but think about prevention and deterrence and talk with our partners, most specifically the Canadians, about how we were going to work together. And we started working with the Canadians on the things that Mike Newton said, and it truly started to form out into something that eventually became the International Independent Panel on Arbitrary Detention and State Relations, and I'll cover that in a bit. So, Mike, I know I said I wouldn't talk about you, but I clearly violated my integrity. I only spent 6 or 7 minutes. I hope that's okay. But this man's been formulative, been doing, I kid you not. And I look at him, and from what I heard about your husband, Sharon, these guys are like, don't, he's going to punish me tonight. Indiana Jones. He's sitting here giving you these lectures about this, that, and the other, and you're scribbling notes, and then you go to get some information later. But he's also out there in the international sphere, as was your husband, trying to get things right. It's not just staying here at Vanderbilt, it's also working with another 6 other of his colleagues, eminent jurists, about how to create legal norms and laws and mechanisms that we can use to help prevent and deter people in this one space. And if we keep doing what Mike's doing and some of the recommendations he's working on, there's a good chance, truly, in the next 10 years, this problem goes away. Now, we're always going to have to deal with terrorists. Terrorists, for some reason, aren't going to play by the rules. But when it comes to nation states, which is, I would say, probably fills up the list of Americans that we have to work to get back, we can actually solve that problem in the next 10 years. But it won't get solved without attention to international law, and it won't get solved without people like this great American doing the hard work. So to my mind, an Indiana Jones guy, and I'm grateful to call you friend, and I'm grateful for a chance to come up here and say a nice thing or two about you. He's a humble man, as was John, but at times you need to give him a little shout out. But more importantly, he's just a part of the story that I want to tell today. So with that, I'm going to talk briefly about the journey, this journey that both Mike Newton and I have been on. So when I took the office at SPEHA, there were 4 people in the office. Me, my chief of staff, a guy who was getting out of the State Department or actually trying to find another job, and one other person. And the caseload, roughly about 30 at that time, but it was too much. We were surviving 24 hours ahead. There was just no time to talk to the families, try to get people out, because the workload was too immense. We started hiring more people, and at a certain point, we got to look 2 weeks out. Hired a few more people, divvied up the labor a little bit, could work maybe 2 months out. And eventually we got to the part where we could look like about a year or 2 out and start talking to members of Congress about how we wanted to shape the legislature, or rather legislation. And by the way, we have a representative from Congressman Mike Green in the office. Raise your hand, good sir. Now, Mark Green is a West Point classmate of mine, a great friend, so grateful and that you're here to represent that. But we were able to start working with Capitol Hill to start working on the American version of the laws that were important to get things done. And very soon on, we were able to, with the help of Congress, and I'll say not with the help of Congress, it was really Congress that did it, members on Capitol Hill passed the Levinson Act. And it has a longer name. It's like the Levinson Act. In fact, I should read it just verbatim if I can find it here. It's actually worth reading if I may. The Robert Levinson Act. Oh my goodness. There we go. Nope, it says it's Levinson Act. Well, we call it the Levinson Act, so it's always hard to find something where it's written out. But anyway, the Levinson Act was passed and named after Robert Levinson, an FBI agent who was taken by the Iranians, and to this day we count as our longest held American. And the Levinson Act codified everything that we were trying to do within my office to create 3 missions for SPEHA. Number 1, negotiate, lead, coordinate the negotiations to bring Americans home. Number 2, support the families. And number 3, build out a prevention and deterrence effort so that one day we make this problem go away. And number 2, warn Americans, keep them from getting into these different issues. So the Levinson Act was the first time that we were able to work with people to make it legal to do what we were doing to bring people home. Absent that law, someone could just wave their hand and the office disappears. But now the office will stay there and will have this mission with the force of law thanks to Congress. Importantly, in this law, they gave us a sanctioning and a visa restriction authority. Now picture that. Usually when you sanction, we're talking about big government, throwing big lightning bolts at our opponents. In this case, the super small office, SPEHA, was giving a full sanctioning authority. And when I say full, that's something if the Russian FSB, whom by the way we sanctioned, if the FSB is taking Americans and then trying to get the Americans to buy them back through a bargaining process, we can sanction the FSB. We can do so by individual or organization. And if we do an individual, we can restrict their abilities to use credit cards, use their banking accounts, use visa restrictions so their kids can't come to the United States and go to Vanderbilt. Believe it or not, stuff like that happens. So it was a very powerful tool that was given to the SPEHA toolkit very early on, and we were grateful for that. And by the way, since 2022, we have used that tool 15 times, mainly against the Russians and the Iranians. Now, the Russians reciprocated and sanctioned me. So I can't go to Russia. I wonder, though, if I go to a country that's friends with Russia, will they get me? I'm probably not going to give it a shot. But so I'm literally sanctioned. And I actually thought, it's kind of, I shouldn't say this because we're being live streamcast. My wife's saying, whatever you're about to say, don't say it. But I often thought, with Brittany Griner for Victor Boot and some of the other swaps that the Russians gave, they've been tough, hard decisions. But at a certain point, I'm like, wow, you're sanctioning me? If anything, I should be getting like a, thanks, Roger. But didn't happen. I'm sanctioned, so I've got to watch myself out there. But I think we've hit the Russians and the Iranians a little harder than they've hit us in that arena. Now, a lot of this comes, as I said, from a conversation from Secretary Blinken. He was a good, strong ally in this, and he helped drive this. It's a pleasure when you're doing something so complex as to try to get laws to fight against this and to work with other countries that your boss is not just on board, but helping to lead the charge. And I was blessed to have Secretary Blinken's help and support and leadership in this role. And the President of the United States, President Biden, as I said, passed an executive order in July of 2022 that supported all of our efforts in building this prevention and deterrence area. One of the things that emanated from that was a core group. Actually, I should back up, actually. Part of this journey, right about this time, the Canadians started to work on what was called the ADI. It's the Arbitrary Detention Initiative. And the Canadians wanted to get countries acknowledge that hostage-taking and using people as bargaining chips is a bad thing to do. So they created the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations. And up to now, they've had 79 countries sign it. I'll say 78 countries in the European Union have signed it. And that's something to get everyone on the same sheet of music to start planning and plotting and scheming against those that would take our citizens. But about this time, with the support of Secretary Blinken, the President, and the Canadians, we also started to work on what we called a core group, a group of countries that could get together and start working multilaterally to start ending this effort. So picture this. Here's the vision. Let's say that a citizen is taken from Belgium. And let's say the Belgians come to this core group of about 10, 12 countries. It's now up to 12. And the Belgians make a case that their citizen was arbitrarily detained by the Iranians. If everyone else in the room agrees and the Belgians make their case, then that person now becomes, I would say, a goal, a cause for the other countries in the room to try to get that person back. So if the Belgians have a citizen held by the Iranians, and the core group agrees that they're arbitrarily detained, at that point, we all start working together to do things like démarches, to ban their diplomats, to levy sanctions, to put other tools against that country, Iran in this example. And our goal, again, is if we can spread this multilateral core group from 12 countries to maybe 20 to 30, and we can all start building up our toolkits, those things that we can use as countries to throw against our opponents. Eventually, we're going to break our opponents. But this started during that period, too. Started off with just a few countries, went to 10, now up to 12. To be very frank, no one wants to talk about who's in the group right now because there are countries out there, the opponents, that you don't want to let them know that your country's a part of it until we gain a little more combat power, a little more oomph, because at a certain point, the countries will start picking off the countries that are as a part of this group. But it's building up steam, and that's where we're trying to take this, to keep growing this multilateral effort. And also, we've been expanding the Levinson Act as a part of this journey. As I said, the Levinson Act was passed and put into public law in 2022. And every year, Congress adds more to it through the National Defense Authorization Act. So every year it's kind of interesting, the National Defense Authorization Act, well, our authorities to fight our opponents on this come from that bill. The Levinson Act is the anchor point, and every year we can stack more authorities and more appropriations onto that. And as a result, we've been able to have more tools that allow us to go after our opponents. It's allowed us to take care of the family members. When someone's family, like when Matthew's parents, in fact, it wasn't really into function when Matthew was taken and we brought him back. But if Matthew was taken and his parents had to quit their jobs in order to agitate for his release, our National Defense Authorization Act allows us to provide his parents with support, fly them to Washington, D.C. so they can talk to us and their congressmen. It allows us to provide them with help in terms of PTSD counseling, medical support, et cetera. And when Matthew eventually comes back, the hostage comes back, they get to tap into that for a period of 5 years. Not just the person coming back, but also the family members, able to tap into mental health support, physical health support, et cetera. So this all comes from this battle that takes place every year with Congress. I say battle. They've been extremely helpful. But we work with members on Capitol Hill to keep finding new and interesting things that we can do to help people. I would say offline, the next thing I'm working on, I'm no longer the SPEHA, but working from the outside, is I'd like to steal something that the Israelis are doing right now with their citizens, the families of their citizens taken in Gaza. Namely, if you're taken as a hostage, it's pretty rough. You know, you might have had an apartment in Nashville. You go to Venezuela, they take you hostage, and suddenly, well, who's paying for your apartment lease? And if they come to grab your apartment and take it away, where do they put your stuff? And your bank accounts. Who's going to pay your credit cards? So what the Israelis have done is they've started giving stipends to the people that are taken so that they don't go into financial hell while they're being held hostage. And they've been given stipends to the close relatives because a lot of these people quit their jobs full time so that they can start pursuing the release of their loved ones. So these are the things that we're working on as a country to start taking care of, not just the person that's held, but also their loved ones that are working on their release. And the last thing I'll mention is during this whole process, this journey, we've been working on travel advisories and I would say indicators that we can give to the American public to warn you against going to places like Iran or Venezuela or Russia. The indicator, it's called the D indicator. And so if you ever were to think to yourself, you know, I want to do some adventure traveling in Afghanistan, but let me check to see if it's dangerous. You go to travel.state.gov and there's a D indicator and there are 9 countries that we say, if you go to this country, there's a decent chance they could grab you and use you as a political bargaining chip. So we would recommend not going. And then we have advisories, like a level 4 travel advisory, which would tell you, do not go to that country because bad things could happen at you. So we're trying to warn you. Now the hard part is, I used to travel all the time, and I never in my life even heard of travel.state.gov, which is tragic, right? And then I'm sitting there telling other people to look at it. But what we're also trying to do is during this period, we're trying to get people smart on the fact that there's a travel.state.gov that exists. Now, I'm going to quickly jump into where we are and then end this with where we want to go. So where we are, here's what these guys at SPEHA and the legal department's doing. We have 4 things that we're trying to do right now in the U.S. government. As of last December, we passed a strategy on countering wrongful detention. Not a bad thing. It's your government strategy for how to stop this stuff. And we're doing 4 things. Number 1, strengthen the domestic toolkit that allows all elements of national power to counter people that are doing this. And that includes these travel advisories, visa restrictions, and diplomatic pressure. Number 2, build out this multilateral coalition that I was talking about. Raise the cost of hostage diplomacy. Build up the Canadian effort, promote collective action, and start country-specific approaches. Because when you want to stop a country from doing this, it's a little different when you're talking to the Iranians, the Russians, or the Venezuelans. So to build up these specific ways to stop that. And the third thing, and under this, the second line of effort, is to promote other SPEHA-like entities. Right now, the United States is the only one that really officially has a hostage envoy, but the Brits are close, the Canadians are taking efforts, the Australians are taking efforts, the Poles and the Germans are also taking efforts. We want to have counterparts across the world to talk about this issue, and countries are taking those actions. Number 3, strengthen the legal mechanisms that are against this horrible topic, the mechanisms and norms. As a part of that, Mike Newton and his team has done an assessment of where we currently are on international law. The Canadians have created the Independent International Panel against arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations. That's what he's on. That's what he's working on. And it's to ID those gaps and seams in the international framework and come up with actionable recommendations, either to pull those seams together or create new laws out there that can fight this. Another thing is we want to support academic research. There's nothing in this. If you want a PhD, this is your topic. You're not going to be struggling to find anything because there's been so little research in the area of state hostage taking that it's ripe for study. And we're hoping that we can get academic organizations to work with the government to find these topics of research. And so far we have someone named Danny Gilbert, a professor out in Northwestern, that's really done a masterful job of getting her students on board. David Ewalt back at the University of Oregon. People are trying to work with us to build out these areas so we can get good scholars and practitioners working together to understand this topic. And also UN-related engagements, working with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, working with the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. And I would say, under Secretary Blinken's leadership, we conducted a meeting at UNGA, the UN General Assembly, where we brought together 44 foreign ministers. That's huge. There's 197 countries on earth, and Secretary Blinken was able to pull together and co-host an event with 44 foreign ministers on this topic where we discussed how we're going to work together to stop it. Now, I'm going to end this here shortly. Well, I'm sorry, the fourth line of effort is increasing that public knowledge and awareness of this topic. And we're doing that through businesses, working through organizations that do business security for multilateral firms, working with companies in the United States so that they can keep their employees aware of what's happening out there. But we also launched a program at the Oslo Freedom Forum last year. It's a coalition against hostage-taking and arbitrary detention that brings together civil society to launch their own efforts to make people aware of what's happening. All right, so where are we going as I wind this up? First off, we're thinking about trying to work with, not thinking about, that sounds too passive. We are working with members on Capitol Hill to talk about what we can do, and I would say Mike's group, in the area of state sponsors of wrongful detention. Could you declare a country like Iran a state sponsor of wrongful detention? And if so, what cost would be levied against the country that had that levied against them? So we're working with Capitol Hill to see if that's a possibility. We're also examining, and I had to write this down because I won't remember it, Chapter 97 of Title 28 of the USC, the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act of 1976. Wouldn't it be nice, Matthew, to take President Maduro or someone else to court and sue them for what they did to you, right? Well, we're working on that too. We're seeing what the contours of that. We're working with members on Capitol Hill very closely. I would say Senators Coons and Risch in the last few years have been tightly lashed with us. We even were able to send a person from the State Department over to Senator Coons' office to work with them to help explore legislative things that we can keep doing together. And we're making some, I would say, some pretty good headway. And lastly, I would say we're very close to getting the report from the International Independent Panel on Arbitrary Detention. And I think they're going to have these actionable recommendations that's going to allow us to maybe make an exponential leap, an evolution in how we look at that. All right, so I'm Greek, so I talk fast anyway. But if you ever want to listen to a book's on tape and you hit it at 1.5 or 2.0 so the person reading the book speaks really fast, you got that in human form right here. Talked fast, I wanted to leave some time, had some ground to cover. I'm going to turn this back over to Professor Newton because I think we're going to do some questions and answers, and I promise to talk a little bit slower.
All right, well, before we do Q&A, Matthew Heath drove in from Knoxville along with his legal team. The legal team is going to stay around if you want questions about this field or about the ins and outs of how you do in Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act litigation or how you get jurisdiction in Florida. And we may have our colleague from Green Hills back at some point to do a lunch event. We'll just have a little soiree and I'll buy some food for you. Matthew, though, I never want anybody in these young students to forget that, yes, we do the law. We solve these hard problems. But we're always doing it on behalf of a client, on behalf of people out there that need the law. So, Matthew, I asked him to take 8 or 10 minutes and tell part of his story. But that's representative of so many other people. I'm getting the signal 5, but 5 to 8. But this is important. Because that's what we do in this business is serve people. And that's why you have to study hard. It's not about grades. It's about being prepared when the hard things come, you're ready to do them. That simple, because people are counting on you. Matthew, thanks for coming.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That's a tough act to follow. Mike, Roger, before I get into anything, I want to tell everybody Roger's nickname is Captain America, and it's true. You know, heroes don't walk around with a cape in real life. In real life, they walk around sometimes with a cane and a leg brace. But you know, I've had a really blessed life. I've worked with a lot of amazing people in my life, and Roger Carstens is maybe one of the most amazing people that you could ever meet. So let's give him a hand. This guy's brought home a lot of Americans. I have so many people to thank. I couldn't possibly cover everybody. I like to say that there was an army of hundreds and thousands of people that worked on this case. I don't have time to thank everybody, but I'd like to make a couple of quick acknowledgments. I'd like to thank the Charnay family for giving us the opportunity to give this lecture. Thank you very much. And I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement to Roger's wife, Melissa. She has just been an amazing person, and I don't think Roger could have done it without somebody amazing like him at home. Thank you, Melissa. So Where to start? I am a native of Tennessee. I was born in Knoxville. I traveled quite a bit throughout my life, and I was on vacation in Colombia. I was traveling to Aruba, and I was stopped at a normal checkpoint. There's some countries that don't have great security. It's pretty common to have police checkpoints. And when I showed my passport, I was detained because I was an American. It was a crystallizing event. So the difference between a problem and a predicament is problems have solutions. Predicaments have outcomes. Being a wrongful detainee, it has an outcome. This is not something that can be fixed. There's a before and there's an after. And it affects every part of your life. And I'd like to address the younger faces in the crowd. I think a lot of people in here are going to have a future as lawyers, and I can't follow these guys. They're just amazing. I want to make it personal. When someone has a horrible event in their life, for example, like a car crash, somebody calls 911, the paramedics show up, they stabilize that patient, and then they're handed off. And those paramedics are amazing people. There are problems that happen to some people in life that are so large and they last so long that it makes the event that paramedic showed up to look like a blink of an eye. It takes lawyers to fix problems this big, okay? And it's a large team. It's not a one-man job, a one-woman job. This takes dozens and hundreds of people, and you can have a huge impact on someone's life because there are people like myself who find themselves through no fault of their own. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a bad person, and then all of a sudden, for political reasons, I'm detained by a foreign country. Political movements completely outside my control. In my specific case, I was traded along with other Americans. My freedom was secured by Roger Carstens by trading the nephews of President Maduro. I didn't detain those people. They were arrested in the United States on unrelated charges. So through no fault of their own, there are Americans around the world right now who are detained in really horrible conditions. The difference between Al-Qaeda kidnapping someone and foreign governments kidnapping someone, sometimes it's a pretty thin line. And I call to you, if you feel like this might be an area that you're interested in, you can make a huge impact on people's lives. Let's see. So let's talk about the effects of wrongful detention. Well, there aren't any good ones. Physically, mentally, financially, it affects your family. So physically, I'm really lucky. I do not have any significant injuries that resulted that are staying with me. There are Americans who are permanently injured in ways that we can't discuss in polite society, and those people need your help. Mentally, again, I still suffer from some PTSD. These organizations keep Americans in horrible, horrible conditions. I was detained by military counterintelligence in Venezuela, the DGCIM. That's the General Direction for Military Counterintelligence. It's a Spanish acronym, so they don't line up. But these are not nice people. These are not nice people. These are brutal people. These are brutal organizations around the world. And without an amazing team of lawyers, without help from the Secretary of State, without help from the National Security Advisor, without help from the President of the United States, a wrongful detainee has no hope. There's no way they can get out of that hole. It's beyond the power of the individual. You're in a bad place when you need the President of the United States to help get you out. Okay. Financially, of course, it's a disaster. We're having some progress. The Levinson family Robert Levinson, Bob Levinson's family is still active in this, and they're absolutely amazing people. we're making some progress on the financial difficulties, but I'm going to put my hat out if anybody wants to throw $1 in it. No, I'm actually doing really well. I'm blessed. I'm making an incredible recovery, mentally, physically, financially. I've been released about 2 years now, and I'm one of the success stories. There's wrongful detainees that I was released with that wouldn't be able to give this talk today. So, our thoughts and prayers go out to them. One of the hardest effects is how it affects your family. I clean up pretty good, but I'm kind of a tough guy. But, the hardest part for me being in that dungeon was knowing how it affected my family, because there was there's nothing I could do about it. It doesn't matter how many times I was beaten. I know I'm tough. I've been beat up before. I'll be beat up again, whatever. But knowing that my family was at home and they were in pain because I was detained and there was nothing I could do about it, it was really hard. And if I didn't have amazing organizations back here, some of the NGOs like Hostage US, the Foley Foundation, the incredible office that Roger worked with, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, if it wasn't for those people, I don't know how my family would have got through it. I know I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to wrap this up with, there's an amazing Robert Frost poem. A lot of us have probably heard of it. And 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled. I think that's probably a pretty good way to put it. There's a lot of Americans out there that they just took the path less traveled, and they ended up in some really difficult situations. There's Americans that are detained. There's maybe a couple hundred Americans around the world right now through no fault of their own. They're detained in some really tough situations, and I would encourage everyone to think about working in this space. There's a really great movie that was released, premiered last week at South by Southwest in Austin. Roger and I were lucky enough to be there. It's Take No Prisoners. You can Google it, and please pay attention to this space. I know Mike is looking at trying to do a screening of it here, so please pay attention to that. I've seen it. I'm in it. I don't want to brag, but I think I look pretty good in it. So it's a great movie, and it's about an hour and a half, and it really gives you an idea of what the whole process is. I highly recommend it. I'm not going to talk about the legislation exactly because more educated guys than me have went over it, and I don't think I've got anything to add. But I do have one final thing. Roger, actually, President Maduro does not have immunity under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act because the U.S. government doesn't recognize him as the president of Venezuela. So I have a couple of great lawyers here, Mike and Pat, who represent my legal team, and we are suing President Maduro. So, Mike, I'll turn it back over to you. I want to thank everybody for coming out today.
All right. It is that time of year. Some of you have classes in a little bit. If you leave quietly. If you can stay, the lawyers will stay. Ambassador Carstens will stay. Matthew will stay. And the wonderful people from SPEHA will stay. We had a great meeting this morning. We have time for maybe 3 questions, not 3 speeches, not Cicero. But what you do have to do is wait for Elisa to give you the mic, and then wait just a second until our sound people are sure that the sound is transferred. So do we have 3 quick questions? Go. 1.
I just want to say first, thank you both for coming here. I know everyone here appreciates you taking the time to talk to us. My question is for the ambassador. I really respect and admire the work that you have done, and you as well, Mr. Heath. But in the last few days, the Trump administration has taken some actions, including deporting several hundred people to an El Salvadorian prison without much due process and potentially in defiance of a judicial order. And I'm just wondering, do you think that this is undermining the goal of building up norms against wrongful detention of foreign nationals?
So I don't know if we know the answer to that. It plays out over time. I would say this. I'm almost going to say, in a way, no, because you might think it might. But there are countries that have been at war. Ukraine, the Ukrainians are fighting the Russians, and yet they still make time to swap prisoners. 1973, America, Vietnam War. While they're still throwing bullets at each other, they're still also working on trading prisoners. The United States had a horrific relationship with Venezuela, Russia, Iran, fill in the blank, and yet we found ways to swap prisoners at times or come up with other deals that bring Americans home. So this is strangely in a stovepipe, a pipeline that, if it's played well, can take everything else happening in the world to include something like that and push it to the side so that both sides can get something out of a deal that takes place between two countries. Having said that, these are the things that you can't necessarily bet $1,000 on because we're not really sure how it plays out. And I might see you 12 months from now and say, oh my gosh, it did have impact. But right now, it's hard to put place a bet on that, but I would lean towards saying that it will not, just because if you want to elevate that to combat between two countries, countries still find ways to trade their people and bring their people home, but remains to be seen. I'll see you next year, this time, same time. Anything you want to add?
No, that was great. Do we have any more questions?
I see this chomping at the bit to talk to these people on the side. Please join me in a rousing thank you.
As a quick thanks, can I please, are you coming up? No. Oh, you got a question?
It's offline.
Okay. I want to give a little SPEHA coin. I'm not the SPEHA anymore, but I bought so many of these, I got to get rid of them. And I might have given one to him. So, Mike, if I've given one to you already, please pretend like I've not and accept this. And if I have given it to you, you can give it to your wife or Lisa or something. But thank you for hosting us to talk about this problem. Thank all of you, and super excited to see what you do with your careers and what fields you get into. You're with a great guy here, in a great lecture series, in a premier school, and I'm excited to see what you do to contribute to the problems out there. Mike, if I may. Thank you.